Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Andy Bowering and Ross McElroy from Apollo Silver. Now, if you've been following our channel since the beginning, I'm talking back in 2020, you've probably noticed a trend. That is that we keep having better and better guests on the channel. Now, if I'm just being honest with you guys, a lot of that is because none of us at the Deep Dive actually came from a mining background. Myself, I'm a former math teacher. Jay, who's the editor of the Deep Dive, well, he used to work at an HVAC shop. So we have had to figure this space out as we went along. So as we've done that, we've been able to identify better guests that are going to provide you guys with more value. But that being said, there's also something else that has happened in the space, and that is that there's been a lack of investment in the Canadian junior markets. And as a result, the only companies that are actually able to raise money are those that are ran by competent people who are able to move their companies forward and are proven strong custodians of capital. So this brings me to yesterday. I sit down to interview Andy Bowering, who I'm excited to get to interview because Andy is a really well-respected guy in the junior mining world. But then Ross McElroy shows up, who is an absolute legend in the mining world in Canada, and he's particularly well known for some of the stuff that he's done in the uranium world. So here I've got two quality people I get to sit down and interview at once, and I'm absolutely stoked thinking about how just a few years ago, we couldn't even identify who we wanted to interview. And here I've got two guys that are so well respected in the industry that can share the knowledge with you guys, our audience, and it's just a testament to how far we've come. So in today's interview, we discuss Apollo Silver. And the reason that we're having Ross on is because he stepped on as CEO, Andy's stepping back into the chairman role. And we get into what the plan is for the company over the next 12 months, ultimately what it's going to take for them to eventually get into production, and what the sort of long-term vision is for the company. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. I'm joined with both Ross McElroy and Andy Bowering. I don't know how I ended up with both of you guys in the same interview, but I got to say I'm ecstatic to have you both. Ross is obviously a legend in the uranium world, and we've got Andy, who is someone who has put together a pretty interesting silver project. I had the pleasure of interviewing at Red Cloud back in the fall. It was my favorite interview that we did. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have both you guys on here. I'm going to start with you, Ross.
Okay.
So Ross, uranium is the hot topic with lots of people on social media. I know we're going to be talking about Apollo Silver here, but I first got to start by asking you, over the weekend, there was some pretty big news in Germany where they've basically, the government's basically come out and said that they're no longer going to resist nuclear power. I'm curious what your reaction to the news is.
I think, it's obviously great news to hear. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. We've always expected that Germany is going to come back into the, back into the uranium picture again. When I first started in the business in the mid '80s, Germany was a very big story. They were, they were, they were probably one of the first to, really embrace the nuclear energy picture. It changed obviously in the last, whatever it would be now, 15 years or so, but I don't see it as a surprise, to be honest, that Germany's coming back into the fold, and it's a global story, and I'm pretty happy with it.
On the topic of uranium, I just have to say that one of the conversations we have internally when we discuss uranium projects is that when we got so many of these little juniors out there that are looking for, those big uranium projects like the one that you found with fission. And it's almost kind of seems like if you want to invest and play on that part of the risk curve, those exploration plays in uranium, that you really got to be looking at stories with, I know it's a cliche, but the experienced management teams, but also that has the capital and the land package to actually go find something big. Because like ultimately the projects in Canada that are going to get to production are the really massive high grade projects, right? Like we're not looking at like these companies that just sort of have these small little properties, which there's probably 30 of them that are publicly listed here in Canada. Does that sound like an accurate assessment, Ross?
If you're talking Canadian projects, yes, they've got to be big. They've got to be high grade because, Athabasca Basin, it's an expensive place to build a mine. So you're talking, in the case of fission, we were looking at $1.5 billion of capex to build a mine. Well, that's the kind of, story you need. So you do need, big players to get involved in the sector. If you were in the US, I think you could, do a little bit smaller scale. The capex isn't as big, but then of course they need higher price uranium in order to make it go. And, so everywhere around the globe is a little bit different and unique in their own characteristics. So smaller companies can get involved in different areas. But yeah, I think in Canada, really, you're talking big scale deposits, big economics.
Now I'm going to turn the conversation to silver, and I could go on with this uranium
Yeah.
conversation all day, but I'm going to turn to Andy here. Andy, since we last spoke at Red Cloud in Toronto back in, I think it was November, silver has it's shown some volatility. It just seems to be hanging in there in the low 30s, despite the fact that gold has had a tremendous 12 months. Why do you think that we haven't seen any sort of a run on the price of silver?
Um, I don't know if I'm enough of an expert on the silver markets to understand that, but you know, in the early sort of runs in the silver market, you get silver is a byproduct from a lot of mines, and so you get guys streaming it off to as a revenue source for them. You get companies that will sell it, forward sell it to lock in profits. So it doesn't become the primary income driver for a lot of mining companies where it is that byproduct. Uh, and um, and so that has an impact on the supply of it. And I think that that despite there being a perceived imbalance between the supply and demand, that gold's had a run because of this anti-Western, anti-US sentiment that's going around the world. And so gold's it's had a big run. Silver hasn't caught up to it, but the future for silver looks pretty good. You're talking about the world wanting to increase its reliance on solar and other forms of renewable energy, and that bodes well for the silver space. So silver typically lags behind gold in these kind of runs. I think if you go back and look at the history of it, you'll see that. And so I suspect that when it does come, it has a pretty elastic run. So, I still feel good about the investment thesis, and it's building a really nice base at 32. So, how do you, or 31, 32, how do you fight against that?
Andy, one of the conversations I have quite frequently with Keith Newmeyer from First Majestic is the lack of quality silver projects that are out there. And I'm talking the primary silver where you're over 50% silver production at a given mine. Is that something that you think about quite a bit when you're looking at M&A, or you're thinking about sort of your vision for Apollo Silver?
Yeah, there are very few pure silver plays, and there's a few companies in the space. And so for as Apollo's concerned, we have if it's not the largest, it's one of the largest undeveloped primary silver deposits in the United States. And so it's got significant value, especially when you look at this trend towards nationalization and less globalization, and the US now needing to catch up on their domestic production in natural resources. I mean, they have relied for the last, well, they've given the Asian economies a 25-year head start, and they have relied on the rest of the world for the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years anyway, maybe 70, for natural resource supply, externally. You can't keep the current narrative of rebuilding the US or rebuilding Western supply lines, so that you're not reliant on Asia. You can't do that and not throw a lot of money into domestic production, and that bodes well for us, I guess.
So, Ross, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you for a second. You right now are joining us from the Canaccord conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, I'm assuming that you go to a few conferences a year where you're chatting with various brokers, investors, other CEOs, thought leaders, etc. And you're getting a sense of the sentiment that exists out there for investing in these junior names. Now, this is a very common question that you see on all these types of interviews that whether it's us or other groups that are doing them, is why is it that we're not seeing capital flow into the junior names just yet? I'm curious here, what's the sentiment like right now? And ultimately, do you get a sense that we are at the start of capital flowing in?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Now, having said where I am at the conference, it hasn't even it's about to get started this afternoon, so there hasn't been a whole lot of opportunity to hear the stories, but I think that that's probably true across the board in almost most commodities, that the smallest of the juniors with exploration plays, they're a little bit difficult to finance at the moment. That's a different story. Right now, the money seems to be moving into companies that have assets. So, if you're blessed enough to have great assets, you're a junior mid-sized company. I think you'll start seeing money flow there, and it works its way down. The cycle. The big producers are the first to attract capital in a good cycle. Then it hits the mid-level, mid-tier, developers and people with good assets. Eventually, it does work its way into the smaller junior market. But yeah, we haven't quite seen that at the smallest level yet. So it'll be interesting to hear, the stories and pitch that I hear over the next couple of days here at the conference. But yeah, I think it's coming. We're not seeing it yet, but companies like the stage that Apollo's at, I think with great assets, ones that you can advance, continue to grow. They'll be. I think people will be, lining up to invest in companies like that.
So, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second here. We recently got this announcement here that you're stepping into the role of chairman. Ross has stepped on as CEO. Why the decision to make the change?
I guess I had always told investors that when I thought the time was right to make the move, I would make the move. I'm always the largest or one of the largest shareholders in the companies that we run. And as a result of that, I really care about the bottom line. Like I care like every other shareholder out there. And so I don't I'll work for the company for little money because I have such a big equity stake. And so I don't mind taking on that role until it warrants bringing in a bigger gun. And so the time was right. I did this in June of 2020. I gave up my 2-year CEO role of Prime Mining to bring in Dan Coons and now Scott Hicks, and I remain one of its largest shareholders and promoters and board member. And but the company's grown substantially from when I turned over the reins in Prime at a 30 or 50 million market cap. Maybe I'm just trying to think what it was. Now it's a several hundred million market cap. And I think the same thing's going to happen in Apollo here. The time was right for a guy like Ross to come in. The street, there's a lot of people banging on Ross's door, and we couldn't wait forever. If we waited any longer, Ross would be somewhere else, and we weren't going to have that. It's just he's too good a value for any organization. So time was right, and and I'm thrilled to work alongside Ross and support him however I can. And and now with Ross, now we can actually go build a bigger team. We can move our assets forward. We can look at other things. We can build the next significant silver company.
So Ross, let me ask you then, from your perspective, when Andy called and you had an opportunity to get involved with Apollo Silver, what ultimately attracted you to decide that you wanted to attach your name to it and spend your time working on this project?
I appreciate that question. I think, for me, the biggest part in any venture that I get involved with is people. I honestly, there isn't anybody better to work with than Andy. He's been so successful at the business. He's a gentleman. He's, understands how to put teams together. Apollo's started, with great assets, in there. I think we're at the beginning of a silver, good silver boom in the price of the commodity, and, companies with tremendous assets like this, that can grow. I've been involved in building companies. I'm very dedicated in that goal. It just seemed like the perfect fit for me to come, after my role at Fission Uranium, taking a couple of months off and then talking a lot more serious to Andy about the opportunities out there. Just really felt like the right group to get involved with, and so. We've got good projects in great areas, but really it's a people-driven business, and I really do like the team that's been here, and I'm just thrilled here to work side by side with Andy and the team.
So, Andy, I'll ask you this one because I assume that Ross is just getting his feet wet here. Today, the company announced that you guys are massively expanding your land package over at the Calico project. What's the strategy here?
Well, we put in Calico's comprised, there's 3 different deposits there, and there's some exploration opportunity, and we took the Waterloo deposit through measured and indicated, and it was ready to go to some sort of economic study, whether an advanced PEA or whether you continue on with more met work and some geotech drilling and then ultimately do a PFS. But suffice to say, it's ready to go to an economic study. It was ready to go a year and a half ago, maybe. But we made the decision that, given that, our market cap was about 20 or $25 million, and that the silver price was down around $20, and markets had been really tough for the juniors, that it didn't make sense to really dilute our shareholders down to do a economic study at Calico, which is a pretty tough time in it's the bottom of the Lassonde curve, and it just wouldn't have been good for shareholders. So we looked for some other things to spice up the company with, and then the silver trade kicked off. And during the process of getting our barite resource compliant or heading towards that, and investigating the gold discovery at Calico, price of silver pops 30%, 35%. The US all of a sudden starts to get very particular about US assets. And so now it looks like it can be a very significant silver play, domestic silver play. And while that was all happening, Lithium Americas had come along and said, hey, we're getting rid of our California assets. They had them for lithium clay stones, but they knew, and we knew, that they were prospective for silver. And they asked us if we had an interest in them. We had actually started talking with them, I don't know, almost a year ago on those. Ultimately, we struck a deal. We bought them from them. And now, so now with, Ross at the helm, and now we're gonna amp up everything. And I guess California is going to be far more significant than it was. And I'm dragging on here, but the other thing I would say is that, because there's so many environmentalists in California, that people have been somewhat afraid of California, and there are clearly better places to go mine or with take less effort in the long run. This need to catch up to the rest of the world in natural resource development, that U.S. need is going to force them to set aside not in my backyard principles and things like that. And so, being in San Bernardino County, where there's over 90 operating mines and quarries, is a good place to be. Long answer. It made sense to buy it.
I didn't realize that there was over 90 in San Bernardino County. That's actually a much higher number than I expected. I also have to ask you about the Cinco de Mayo project. How are things progressing here with community relations?
Things are good. What I would say there is that, and I can't remember when we last spoke, but we signed the option agreement with MAG on September the 23rd. December the 13th, the APGO had its election. The APGO is the local group that controls surface rights. And they were not sworn in until February the 3rd. So we couldn't conduct any business with them until then. But since then, they've allowed our geologists and our engineers on the property to survey drill collars. And we are in discussions with members of the community to try and get everybody to the table to have a vote. We've been patient because, especially in Latin American countries, their feelings run long. They don't drop things overnight. And this has been a long, it's been stewing for a long time, the problem in the community. And to rush in there and try and resolve it overnight isn't fair to anybody. Deals only work when everybody wins. And so we've been deliberately taking our time. But what I would say is I think we're getting closer. There's a, it's kind of curious that we're having this, because right now our country manager is in a meeting with one of the congressmen from the district, and we've already met. Ross had the pleasure of being on one of those calls just over a week ago, but there's a keen sense of interest from a lot of other parties now to see us get moving forward at Cinco. And on a macro level, and I said before that on the macro level, the Trump administration has been exporting a lot of unemployed people back to Mexico, whereas before, legals and illegals would go up to the US and work and send back money. Now they're heading back. The economy's in trouble in Mexico. There's clear signs of something going to break in Mexico. You just had another big faction of the Sinaloa cartel get granted political asylum in the US. And so I think there's some bigger pressures coming to Mexico on the macro level. That's going to bode well for us. And on the micro level, they need what we have to offer. We're getting closer to having a community discussion on that. And I think, at the end of the day, we're going to get this done.
Okay, I'll leave it with this question here for Ross. Ross, when you think about Apollo Silver, what gets you really excited about it? What's the first thing that comes to your head that ultimately is the reason that you got involved, and what you're most looking forward to about the company in regards to the entire assets? What's that one thing that you kind of think about that gets you the most excited?
Yeah, well, I think what we're talking about here, Cinco de Mayo in Mexico, is, what's not to get excited about there? I think if we can, bridge the, the community situation and get a new social license to be back there operating, and turn that absolute world-class discovery / historic resource into something current. There's so much room to grow there. That is a it's a very worthwhile project, and it doesn't show up yet in the market cap of Apollo Silver. So that's the just that alone is a tremendous opportunity. Seeing, I think we're going to look at other projects too, and just see how we can grow. But I think the vision here is that, and Andy, I think, said it beautifully, but the vision is to grow Apollo from, if you want to compare it to where Prime was several years ago to where it's at now, multiples further from where we're currently sitting. I think that is definitely achievable. Having quality assets in both the U.S. and Mexico, and such a solid team to work behind here. I think the future for Apollo Silver just looks really, really exciting, and it's great to be part of it.
All right. Well, Ross, Andy, I'm thrilled that I got the honor of sitting down with both you guys at once to do this.
Yeah,
Hopefully we can do this again in the future, and we'd love to make it to site at either of the locations if you guys are open to having us at some time. I think that this is a great story with a couple of really great respected people in the mining industry that I'm really excited to see how it plays out.
Thank you very much, Steve. And for sure, we'll take you to both sites if you like. We're going to probably try and organize a analyst and newsletter tour for sometime this fall.
Amazing. Thanks,
Good.
guys.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Guys, also let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks for watching, everyone.